Tonight, we delve into the legend of a book so forbidden that the church didn't merely hide it. They hunted it across continents, buried it beneath the stones of secret vaults, and whispered of its power in shadows. A manuscript said to be written by Thoth himself, the god of wisdom, containing knowledge that could awaken the mind, bend reality, and expose the secrets they spent centuries suppressing. Its pages held formulas, symbols, and truths that could change everything we thought we knew about history, consciousness, and the divine. But this was never meant to be found. Those who sought it faced labyrinthine catacombs, cryptic codes, and guardians who would stop at nothing to keep the knowledge sealed. And those who glimpsed its secrets, who tried to understand its message, vanished into obscurity, leaving only fragments for the brave to piece together. So before you step further into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because tonight we uncover the book that the church feared, the wisdom of Thoth, and the truths hidden for thousands of years. In the hush of the ancient desert, there was a rumor so powerful that even the wind slowed down to listen. They said there existed a book written not by a human, but by a being who walked between worlds. A book so dangerous that the pharaohs themselves feared to touch it. A book so brilliant that a single page could awaken a person into seeing the universe for what it truly is. And at the center of this legend stood the name Thoth, the scribe of the gods, the keeper of wisdom, the master of every secret ever whispered beneath the sun. Imagine a night in ancient Egypt when the stars felt close enough to touch. Priests moved through temple corridors, holding oil lamps that flickered like living fire. Their steps were slow because they believed that even thinking too loudly about Thoth might draw his attention. They taught that when the world began, it was Thoth who measured its shape and wrote its laws into existence. They believed he knew the weight of a soul, the path of every star, and the hidden blueprint behind creation itself. Yet, the deepest fear did not come from Thoth himself. It came from the thought that somewhere among the scrolls and tablets he left behind, there was one text that contained everything. A book that could grant a person the power to command the unseen forces that shape reality. One legend said the book taught how to speak with the dead. Another claimed it revealed how to travel outside the body. A third whispered that the book could bend time like soft clay. Whatever the truth was, the priests agreed on one thing. If the book ever fell into the wrong hands, the world would never be the same. So they hid it. They built secret chambers beneath the temples and carved warnings into the stone. They said Thoth placed a curse on the book so that anyone unworthy who opened it would lose their mind to the very knowledge they sought. Still, this only made people more curious. Scholars from distant lands sailed across the sea, hoping to catch even a rumor of the book. Travelers wandered through the deserts, searching for the forgotten halls where Thoth once walked. But none returned with proof, only stories. As the centuries passed, the legend grew. Some claimed that the book could reveal the true name of God. Others said it taught how to create life. Some said the book had been destroyed long ago, while others believed it slept deep within a hidden vault, waiting for the right person to discover it again. But the most unsettling part of the legend was this. If Thoth truly wrote a book containing the secrets of the universe, then someone in history must have found it. Someone must have read it. And someone must have feared the power it offered so much that they buried both the book and the truth behind layers of silence. This is where our journey begins, not with certainty, but with a question. What if the greatest secret of the ancient world was never lost at all? What if it was taken? And what if those who guard it are still watching? For as long as ancient Egypt stood beneath its golden sun, there was one manuscript whispered about in shadows, and never spoken aloud in daylight, the Book of Thoth. The very sound of its name was said to stir unseen forces and call the attention of spirits that lived between the worlds. Priests believed that words carried power, but Thoth's words carried creation itself. This was not an ordinary scroll or a simple set of teachings. It was the forbidden manuscript that mapped the structure of reality as if the universe were a vast machine, and Thoth held the instruction manual. Inside its pages, legends claimed there were formulas that described how the soul moved from life to life. There were astral maps showing invisible pathways stretching across the sky past the stars and into realms beyond human sight. There were diagrams drawn with symbols so old that no modern language could fully express what they meant. These symbols were described as living shapes, shifting in meaning depending on who looked at them. Only the highest Egyptian initiates were allowed even to hear its name, because they believed that knowledge this powerful could not simply be learned. It had to be survived. The priests who guarded the manuscript belonged to a secret order within the temples. They trained for years studying astronomy, sacred geometry, and the strange language of signs that Thoth was said to have invented. They believed every line within the manuscript was a key that opened a door to something greater. Some doors led to wisdom, others led to madness. And only a few could tell the difference before it was too late. Whenever an initiate was finally deemed ready to witness a fragment of the book, the ceremony took place at night in the deepest chamber beneath the temple. Torches were dimmed until the room was barely lit, and the air felt thick with the breath of unseen watchers. The manuscript was kept inside a stone chest carved with warnings. If a person with a corrupt heart touched it, the priests believed the text would turn blank in their hands, denying them the truth. Stories told of initiates who read just a paragraph and emerged with eyes filled with visions they could not explain. Some spoke of hearing voices that did not come from the earth. Others said they saw time stretching forward and backward, as if all events were taking place at once. A few never returned from the chamber at all. Their minds slipped beyond the reach of the physical world, leaving their bodies alive but empty. Yet, the power within the manuscript was too great to destroy. The priests feared that if they burned it or buried it, the knowledge wouldn't die but scatter like sparks across the world. So they swore an oath to protect it, to study it, to make sure it never fell into the hands of those who sought power instead of truth. But history has a way of testing even the strongest vows. Empires rise and fall, armies invade, secrets slip through cracks. And somewhere in the passing of centuries, the forbidden manuscript began to drift beyond the temple walls. A single missing page, a stolen fragment, a whispered verse. Until finally the greatest fear of the priests came true. Someone outside the sacred order found it, and that single discovery would change the course of history forever. In the quiet halls of an ancient Egyptian temple, where the air always smelled of incense and secrets, a young priest named Karu began to ask the kinds of questions that made elders whisper his name with worry. He was brilliant, curious, and far too bold for someone expected to obey without hesitation. While others memorized sacred prayers, Karu wanted to know why the words worked. While others followed ritual, he wanted to understand what lay behind it. And while most priests feared the legends of the Book of Thoth Karu, felt an unusual pull toward them, like a silent voice calling him from the dark. One night while the temple slept, he wandered into a forgotten storeroom where baskets of old papyrus had been left to gather dust. He was searching for astronomy scrolls, but what he found instead was something he was never meant to see. A single fragment of a manuscript wrapped in faded linen, as if trying to hide itself from the world. When he unwrapped it, the hairs stood on his arms. The ink was ancient yet sharp, as if written yesterday. At the top of the fragment was a symbol he recognized from forbidden stories, the mark of Thoth. Karu knew he should put it back. No one below the highest level of initiation was allowed to read even a sentence related to the Book of Thoth. But curiosity pulled him harder than fear. He touched the papyrus and felt a strange vibration, like a faint heartbeat, moving through the fibers. The fragment described something called the inner eye, a hidden sense that could open when a person learned how to look without their physical eyes. It spoke of reincarnation not as a belief, but as a law of nature, describing the soul as a traveler who keeps returning until it remembers what it truly is. The more he read, the more he felt the world around him shift. The text explained how consciousness was not created by the body, but flowed into it, like light into a lamp. It said that humans were reflections of a greater mind, and that this greater mind was connected to Thoth, the architect of cosmic understanding. The fragment even hinted at methods to awaken parts of the brain that slept within most people, allowing them to sense things normally hidden beyond the physical world. By the time Karu reached the last line, his breath had changed. His heartbeat felt slower, and the world around him seemed brighter, even though the room was still dim. He felt as if someone had lifted a veil from his thoughts. Images flickered at the edge of his vision faces, and places he knew he had never seen in this life, yet somehow recognized. It frightened him, but it also thrilled him. When dawn came, he hid the fragment beneath his robes and stepped back into the temple halls, trying to act normal. But something inside him had awakened. He felt watched, not by people, but by the universe itself, as if the knowledge he read had marked him. He wanted more. He needed to know where the rest of the manuscript was hidden. But in Egypt, during that time, wanting too much knowledge was the most dangerous desire of all. And as Karu soon learned, the line between awakening and destruction was thinner than anyone had ever warned him. In the years that followed, the whispers surrounding the Book of Thoth changed from simple curiosity to something far more unsettling. People no longer spoke of it as a collection of secret wisdom. They began to claim that the book could wake the dead, not in the way storytellers describe corpses rising from their tombs, but in a way far more mysterious. They said the book could resurrect the mind and pull memories from past lives back into the present. They said a person who read its pages could remember every lifetime they had ever lived. And that kind of power terrified everyone from the pharaohs to the priests who guarded the temples. Egypt believed deeply in the journey of the soul. Each person was thought to walk through many worlds before reaching the next life. But the idea that someone could awaken all those memories at once was seen as dangerous. If a person remembered every life they had lived, they might understand truths normally meant only for gods. They might see through the illusions that kept society stable. They might rise above fear. They might break the chains of authority. And no ruler in history wanted their subjects to be that free. The rumors grew even louder after strange events began occurring around the temples. A priest who had fallen sick and was expected to die suddenly awoke, claiming he saw his past family standing beside him. A young woman who had never studied astronomy drew the night sky with perfect accuracy and said she had mapped the stars in a life before her current one. A soldier in the royal guard began speaking a language no one had heard in centuries, insisting it was his first tongue. These stories spread like wildfire, and at the center of every rumor was the same explanation. Someone had touched a piece of the Book of Thoth. Priests tried to calm the panic. They claimed the stories were exaggerations or tricks of the mind. But inside the inner chambers of the temples, where only the highest ranks were allowed, the truth was known. A fragment of the book had gone missing, and someone in Egypt had read it. The effects were unpredictable. Some people awakened with visions. Others became overwhelmed by memories they could not understand. A few slipped into madness, but none were unchanged. Foreign empires heard the stories as well. Traders carried tales across the sea, telling kings and scholars about a mysterious manuscript that could reveal the soul. Soon, spies began appearing in the markets of Thebes and Memphis, pretending to buy grain and spices while secretly searching for clues about the book. Egypt found itself at the center of a hidden war for knowledge, and the temples became fortresses guarding secrets older than any kingdom. To prevent chaos, the priests made a fearful decision. They began locking away more and more texts. They restricted access to sacred libraries. They tightened their rituals and silenced anyone who asked dangerous questions. But it was already too late. The idea of the book had escaped into the world, and ideas are impossible to chain once they begin to spread. What frightened the rulers most was not the fear of someone waking the dead. It was the fear that someone might awaken themselves, that a single person might rise above the limits of one lifetime and carry the wisdom of many. Because a person who remembers who they have been cannot be controlled. And now that rumor had taken root, there was no turning back. Long after the first whispers of the Book of Thoth spread through the temples of Egypt, word of its power drifted across the Mediterranean Sea, carried by merchant sailors and travelers who did not fully understand what they were speaking of. But in Greece, a land bursting with philosophers who hungered for truth, even the smallest rumor could ignite a wildfire of curiosity. And that is exactly what happened. By the time the 4th century before the Common Era arrived, Greek thinkers had become obsessed with the idea that Egypt held the oldest wisdom in the world. They believed the Egyptians possessed secrets about the soul, the stars, and the invisible forces of the universe that no Greek teacher had ever touched. So they sailed across the sea in search of the truth. Some traveled openly, introducing themselves as scholars. Others went in secret, fearing that Egypt might refuse to share its sacred knowledge. When they arrived, they did not seek treasure or gold. They sought Thoth. They sought the mind behind creation. They sought the book rumored to contain the architecture of reality. Historians later wrote that great Greek thinkers like Pythagoras, Plato, and Solon studied in Egypt. But what they did not say clearly is that many of these philosophers were looking for something specific, a text so ancient it seemed to come from before history itself, a book that explained how divinity and humanity were connected, a book that showed that the universe was not a random accident, but a living conscious structure. The Egyptians were extremely careful. They allowed foreigners to see certain temples and learn certain teachings, but anything related to Thoth was protected with silent intensity. Still, Greece was filled with determined minds. Through questions, conversations, and carefully observed rituals, Greek philosophers began to collect fragments of ideas that hinted at what Thoth had taught. Some priests quietly shared pieces of wisdom. Others feared punishment, but believed truth should not be buried forever. Slowly, piece by piece, a new collection of teachings was born. These fragments traveled back to Greece, where scholars wrote them down and expanded on them. They described a divine mind that created the universe through thought. They described the soul as eternal and capable of rising to higher states of awareness. They described the world as a reflection of something greater. This growing body of knowledge would eventually be gathered into a set of texts called the Corpus Hermeticum. It was not the full book of Thoth. It was not even close. But it carried enough of the original ideas to change the ancient world. Greek philosophers were stunned by what they found. These teachings did not say humans were weak creatures under the control of gods. They said humans contained a spark of the divine and could awaken it through knowledge. They did not say the universe was ruled by fate. They said the universe responded to consciousness. These ideas were powerful, dangerous, and incredibly inspiring. As the teaching spread, some Greek thinkers began forming small groups dedicated to Hermetic learning. They studied the stars and saw patterns that matched what the Egyptians hinted at. They practiced meditation to try to open the inner eye spoken of in the fragments. They explored the mysteries of the soul with seriousness rarely seen in the ancient world. But every gain in knowledge has a price. As Greece grew more fascinated by Hermetic wisdom, Egypt grew more cautious. The priests feared they were losing control of truths meant to stay hidden. And somewhere beneath the sands of the Nile, the remaining fragments of the true book of Thoth were locked away even deeper. The world had changed, and the chase for forbidden knowledge had only just begun. When Rome finally extended its reach into Egypt at the end of the 1st century before the Common Era, the legions believed they were conquering land. What they did not realize was that they were also stepping into a world built on secrets older than their entire empire. Rome took the temples, the libraries, and the cities, but what truly captured their imagination were the whispers. The quiet rumors passed from merchant to soldier to scholar about a hidden book written by a god, the Book of Thoth, a manuscript said to hold the structure of reality itself. Even the most practical Roman generals heard the rumors and felt something uneasy stir in their minds. As Rome absorbed Egypt, strange new ideas began slipping into the heart of the empire. Roman thinkers, who had grown tired of their own rigid philosophies, were fascinated by the mysterious knowledge of the Nile. They heard about Thoth, the god who measured the heavens and wrote the laws of existence. They heard about the forbidden manuscript that taught the soul how to rise into higher states of being. Soon, Roman mystics began forming hidden circles, meeting in dimly lit houses, reading scraps of Hermetic teachings brought back from Alexandria. These early Hermetic groups believed that if they could gather enough pieces, of the ancient wisdom, they might unlock the secrets that Egyptian priests had guarded for thousands of years. But with knowledge comes danger. The early church was beginning to grow inside the Roman Empire, and its leaders watched these hermetic circles with unease. The teachings of Thoth claimed that divinity lived inside every person. The church taught that divinity flowed only through God and through the authority of the church itself. The Hermetic texts said the soul was eternal and could ascend through knowledge. The church said salvation came only through faith. The two worlds could not coexist. At first, the church ignored these strange Egyptian ideas, believing they were nothing more than foreign superstition. But as Hermetic groups grew, the church began to notice something troubling. People were listening. People were questioning. People were becoming curious about the nature of the soul in ways that did not rely on doctrine. Roman citizens who felt lost or unsure of their place in the world found comfort in teachings that said they carried a spark of divine intelligence within them. Behind closed doors, church leaders debated how dangerous these ideas might become. If people believed they had the power to awaken themselves, they might stop looking to religious authority for guidance. They might challenge the order that the church was slowly building. They might even begin searching for the forbidden manuscript itself. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Rome, Hermetic circles continued to grow. They met in abandoned bathhouses near the Tiber River or in the storage rooms beneath wealthy villas. They studied the stars and practiced ancient breathing rituals whispered to open the inner eye. They copied fragments of text onto wax tablets, always afraid that the wrong person might discover what they were doing. Some Roman governors tried to suppress the gatherings, but knowledge has a way of slipping through cracks. The more the church pushed the ideas away, the more people became drawn to them. It was as if the spirit of Thoth himself moved silently through the empire, leaving flickers of curiosity wherever he passed. By the time the 2nd century arrived, Egypt was no longer a distant province. Its mysteries had begun to flow through Roman society like an underground river. And at the deepest part of that river was the same powerful fear the Egyptian priests once held, that somewhere hidden in the world the Book of Thoth still existed, and that one day someone would find it. When the early Christian church began to rise within the Roman Empire, it faced more than political challenges. It faced a battle for the human soul, not just in a spiritual sense, but in a philosophical one. The church taught that God lived above humanity, and that people could only reach him through obedience faith and the authority of the church itself. But the Hermetic teachings connected to Thoth said something completely different. They said the divine spark was not above mankind. It was inside mankind. They said every person carried a piece of the cosmic mind that created the universe, and that through knowledge and awakening, a human could rise into a higher state of being. To the early Christian hierarchy, this idea was more dangerous than any army. Priests debated in dimly lit chambers, whispering about the growing influence of Hermetic groups. These groups taught meditation, sacred geometry star knowledge, and the awakening of the inner eye. They told their students that God was not distant. God was within them. And if this idea spread, the church feared it would break their entire structure of authority. People would no longer need priests to guide their salvation. They would no longer need strict rules or strict obedience. They would seek truth within themselves, rather than from a pulpit. The church leaders believed Hermetic texts were a direct threat to the foundation of their faith. Hermetic writings described a universe filled with layers of consciousness. They said the mind could transcend physical limits and perceive realities hidden from ordinary sight. They said the soul moved through lifetimes, gathering experience until it remembered its divine origin. None of this matched the doctrines the Church was trying to build. As Christianity gained more power, Church leaders began launching campaigns to identify any teaching that contradicted their growing system. Hermetic writings quickly moved to the top of the list, not because they were false, but because they were too empowering. The teachings of Thoth encouraged thinking, questioning, and exploring. They inspired people to search beyond the physical world and to believe they could reach the divine through understanding. The Church feared that if people embraced this path, they would become impossible to control. Christian leaders began labeling Hermetic ideas as pagan deception, even though many concepts such as the divine word and the creative mind sounded strangely similar to their own teachings. But the key difference was freedom. Hermeticism said every human was capable of divine insight. The Church insisted only its chosen leaders could interpret the truth. One path gave people independence. The other gave the Church power. As the centuries passed, the fear grew stronger. Bishops and scholars wrote warnings, urging believers to avoid Egyptian texts. They claimed Hermetic teachings came from demons, even though those who studied them reported feelings of peace, clarity, and awakening. Secret orders of monks who admired ancient wisdom copied Hermetic writings, carefully hiding them in monastery walls. But publicly, the Church condemned them. The more the Church tried to suppress the teachings of Thoth, the more powerful the mystery became. People wanted to know why a religion built on truth feared certain texts so deeply. They wanted to know what secret was being guarded. In the end, the Church feared Hermeticism because it did not place humanity beneath the divine. It placed humanity within the divine. It taught that the universe was alive with knowledge, and that every person carried a spark of the same intelligence that shaped the stars. This was the truth the Church could not control, and this was the truth they would do everything to bury. There came a time when silence began to spread across the ancient world, not naturally, but by force. As the early Christian Church grew in influence, its leaders decided that the best way to protect their authority was to remove anything that contradicted their version of truth. And so, the Great Purge began. It started quietly with warnings from bishops who claimed certain texts led believers away from God. But soon, the warnings turned into orders, and the orders turned into destruction. Hermetic writings, once treasured for their insight into the soul and the stars, were suddenly declared dangerous. Anything connected to Thoth was labelled heresy. Alexandria, the shining jewel of ancient knowledge, became one of the first targets. For centuries, its libraries had been filled with scrolls gathered from every corner of the world. Philosophers, sailors, kings, and scholars came to Alexandria to learn about creation, the heavens, medicine, mathematics, and the spirit. Hidden among its shelves were Hermetic manuscripts copied from older Egyptian sources. Some were barely understood even by the scholars who protected them. But when the Church declared war on forbidden knowledge, the guardians of the libraries could no longer keep them safe. Night after night, Church officials and soldiers entered the libraries with strict orders. They searched for symbols associated with Thoth, for writings that described the inner eye, for scrolls that taught that divinity lived within the human mind. When they found them, they confiscated or burned them. flames that once symbolized enlightenment turned into tools of erasure, ancient scrolls made from papyrus that had survived centuries of war and weather curled into ash in moments. The smoke carried away memories that would never return. But Alexandria was not the only place touched by this darkness. Across the Mediterranean Hermetic schools were raided. The temples that once honored knowledge were emptied of their sacred texts. Some priests were arrested for refusing to surrender the writings. Others hid fragments inside walls, behind stone slabs, or beneath temple floors, hoping future generations would rediscover them. The Great Purge spread like a shadow, following the path of the expanding church. In Syria, scholars watched in silence as their manuscripts vanished. In North Africa, ancient libraries fell under strict control. In Greece, where Hermetic ideas had once inspired philosophers, officials ordered that all copies of Egyptian mystical texts be destroyed or locked away where no one could reach them. Many texts that survived did so only because brave individuals risked their lives. A monk in the desert copied pages by candlelight, hiding the originals under sand. A scholar in Memphis smuggled a scroll inside a clay pot, pretending it contained grain. A group of sailors hid fragments in false bottoms of their crates, hoping they would not be searched. These acts of courage saved bits and pieces of the ancient wisdom, but most of the knowledge vanished forever. The church believed it was saving souls by removing dangerous ideas. Yet, in their effort to protect their doctrine, they destroyed insights that had guided civilizations for thousands of years. They erased teachings that encouraged self-discovery and spiritual awakening. They removed the very texts that reminded humanity of its divine potential. When the flames finally died, the world became quieter. Questions that once filled the air were replaced with fear. The Great Purge did not just destroy scrolls, it destroyed memories. It severed a link between ancient wisdom and the future. And somewhere deep beneath the ashes, the spirit of Thoth waited for the day when his book would rise again. There is a strange thing about truth. Even when locked away, even when burned, even when chased into silence, it refuses to die. And during the centuries that followed the Great Purge, this refusal became a quiet rebellion hidden in stone cellars beneath monasteries far from the eyes of the powerful. The Book of Thoth, the wisdom of Hermetic teachings. The ancient knowledge that once lit the courts of pharaohs should have vanished forever. But it did not. Because there were still a few who understood its value and believed it belonged to the future, not the flames. In monasteries across Egypt, Syria, Greece, and Italy, certain monks began to feel the weight of conscience. These men were trained to obey, to copy only approved texts, and to submit to church authority. Yet, when they saw ancient scrolls being taken away to be destroyed, something inside them stirred. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a whisper from Thoth himself, calling from beyond time. Whatever it was, it pushed them to act. Late at night, when their brothers slept, selected monks lit candles in the scriptorium and unrolled forbidden scrolls that had been smuggled out before the purge reached their walls. They worked slowly, copying each symbol, each line, each teaching with trembling hands. Some feared they might be discovered. Others feared they might go mad, reading the very knowledge the church warned them about. But they continued anyway. They believed the world would one day need these words again. The rooms where they worked were always cold. Wind seeped through cracks in the stone walls. Candle flames swayed like frightened souls. Yet the monks laboured with total devotion. They knew that they were not simply copying a text. They were rescuing a civilization's memory. Each new copy they made was a spark of ancient light placed carefully into the darkness of the age. Once a page was finished, the next challenge came hiding it. If church authorities found even a single unapproved manuscript, the monks involved could face severe punishment or even death. So they built secret hiding places, behind false walls made of thin stone slabs that slid aside with the right pressure, under loose floor tiles that looked no different from the rest, inside hollow beams carved so precisely that no one could see the difference. Some hid pages within the bindings of harmless-looking books. Others buried scrolls under gardens, knowing future hands might one day feel the earth shift and dig them up. Not all monks survived their silent mission. Some were caught and never seen again. Some vanished in the night after being betrayed. A few fell ill from exhaustion after spending too many nights inhaling smoke from their candles. Yet, their work continued through new hands, new generations. Over time, a patchwork of secret hermetic writings spread across Europe and the Middle East. None contained the full book of Thoth, but each scrap, each line, each whisper echoed the same belief that the human soul was powerful, that knowledge was transformative, and that divinity lived within every person who dared seek it. And so, even though the church tried to erase the ancient light, it continued to glow through cracks in history. The Hermetic texts survived, disguised, forgotten, buried, but alive. The Book of Thoth would not die. It waited patiently, like a sleeping god, knowing that one day the world would be ready to hear its voice again. In a quiet monastery, perched on a lonely hill, far from the noise of any city, a young monk named Lucian spent his days in silence. He had entered the monastery as a teenager, believing he was dedicating his life to God, truth, and obedience. But as the years passed, he began to notice something strange. There were locked rooms he was not allowed to enter. There were shelves in the library, covered with cloth, as if hiding something dangerous. And there were whispers among the older monks about books that should never be read. Every time Lucian asked questions, he was told the same thing. Some knowledge is not meant for human minds, but curiosity is a powerful thing, especially in someone who truly seeks truth. One cold evening, after the final prayers, Lucian stayed behind in the scriptorium, pretending to tidy the inkpots. When the others left, he noticed a faint breeze coming from behind a shelf that should have been flush against the wall. Heart pounding, he pushed it gently, and the wooden shelf shifted, revealing a thin gap and a hidden door. He knew he should walk away. He knew opening it could risk everything. But something deep in his mind urged him forward. Inside, he found a small room, lit only by the moon, slipping through a narrow window. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. There, on a stone table, lay a single codex, wrapped in cloth, almost glowing in the moonlight. Lucian unwrapped it slowly, his hands trembling. The cover was old, made of dark leather, with symbols he had never seen before. When he opened it, the first page made his breath catch. It was a Hermetic codex. The manuscript spoke of the soul as eternal. It described the universe as a living mind. It taught that knowledge was the pathway to awakening, not obedience. Lucian read about the inner eye and the power of thought. He learned ideas that had never been spoken in his lessons. Ideas that the divine spark lived within every person, that the human spirit was not meant to bow blindly, but to rise and understand. These teachings shook Lucian to his core. Everything he had been taught said that only priests could guide souls. That questioning was dangerous. But here in his hands were words older than Rome itself, teaching that truth was something each person could seek directly. For the first time in his life, he felt something awaken inside him, like a candle being lit in a dark room. He stayed there for hours, reading page after page, until the moon began to fade. When he finally stepped out of the hidden chamber, he was no longer the same young monk who had entered. He carried a secret that could destroy him, yet it felt more precious than anything he had ever known. Over the next days, Lucian returned to the Codex again and again, each time feeling more torn. If he revealed what he had found, he could be punished, or worse, if he stayed silent, he would betray the truth he had discovered. The teachings of the Codex told him that fear was the true prison, and that awakening required courage. Lucian knew he could no longer live the life he once accepted. He had stepped into a forbidden world where knowledge was alive and powerful. And now he had to decide whether he would hide it or defy Rome and protect it with his life. Lucian opened the Codex one evening with a mixture of fear and wonder. The parchment was fragile, yet the ink shimmered as if alive. As he turned the pages, he found a passage that made him pause and hold his breath. It was a story of creation, unlike anything he had learned in the monastery. It claimed that before Adam, there were beings of light who walked the earth and the heavens. These beings were not gods in the way he understood them. They were conscious entities filled with knowledge and purpose. They shaped the first moments of existence and left a spark in humanity. The text explained that humans did not inherit sin. They inherited divine consciousness. Every soul carried within it a fragment of the original light. According to the manuscript, the story of Adam and Eve had been simplified and altered by those who sought to control understanding. Instead of a tale of disobedience, the true message was that humans were born with the ability to awaken their own knowledge and divine potential. This understanding could make a person powerful beyond imagination, but it also came with responsibility. Lucian read the passage again and again. His mind struggled to reconcile what he had been taught for years with what the Codex revealed. Every prayer he had recited, every lesson about sin and obedience seemed suddenly incomplete. The manuscript described a reality where humans weren't flawed, creatures needing salvation, but vessels of ancient wisdom, capable of remembering the light they had inherited. It said that the human soul could rise through awareness, reflection, and discipline, until it returned to the source of all consciousness. The Codex described rituals that were not spells, but exercises in remembering. Meditation techniques to open the inner eye, symbols that connected the mind to the stars, and words that could awaken memories of previous lives. The beings of light weren't distant observers. They were teachers embedded in the flow of existence, showing humans the path back to themselves. Humanity hadn't fallen from grace. It had simply been taught to forget what it already knew. Lucian felt both awe and fear. The implications were enormous. If the Church ever learned that humans were inherently divine in this way, it would challenge the authority they had spent centuries building. The Codex implied that knowledge and awakening were not gifts granted by priests or prophets, but rights that belonged to every person. Obedience was not the path to God. Understanding was. He imagined what the world would look like if this truth spread. People would question laws, challenge teachings, and seek wisdom independently. Society could be transformed. Wars fought over control of souls would lose their power. Humanity would remember the light hidden inside every mind. Lucian understood that he could not speak of this. Not yet. To reveal it would be dangerous and could cost him his life. But keeping it hidden felt like a betrayal of the greatest truth he had ever discovered. The Codex had rewritten the story of Genesis not as a tale of sin, but as a map to awakening. And Lucian, now a guardian of this knowledge, realized that he had stepped into a war between light and control that had lasted for centuries and was far from over. By the year 1020, the Church had become a force unlike any other in Europe. Its influence stretched across kingdoms and villages alike, and the slightest hint of heresy could draw the full weight of its power. When rumors reached the higher ranks that a young monk possessed a codex of forbidden knowledge, the Inquisition began to move. They did not announce their intentions. They did not send letters or proclamations. They worked quietly, with patience and precision, for they understood that subtlety was more deadly than swords. Lucian had no idea that eyes were watching him. He moved through the monastery halls, as he always had, carrying the codex beneath his robes, reading passages in the candlelight, and memorizing what he could. Outside, messengers rode across the countryside, sending news to inquisitors stationed in distant towns and cities. The Church was assembling men trained to seek out heretical knowledge and destroy it. But the most dangerous among them were the trackers who never rested, who never asked questions, and who never hesitated. The hunt began in silence. Monks who had once been Lucian's friends noticed strangers in the villages, shadowing him during morning prayers and observing his movements as he collected water or worked in the scriptorium. They did not speak. They did not warn him. The Inquisition preferred the fear of uncertainty to open confrontation. Every glance from a stranger, every sudden footstep in an empty corridor, every misdelivered message became a thread that could unravel Lucian's safety. The young monk sensed something was wrong. A shadow in the hallway that lingered too long. A servant who stared, but did not greet him. The animals in the monastery courtyard grew restless. Lucian felt the weight of eyes pressing on him, even when no one appeared near. He began to travel only at night, slipping past the gates under the cover of darkness, keeping the codex pressed against his chest as if the book itself could sense the danger. Across the region, the Church had sent letters sealed with red wax, instructions to hunt for any hermetic texts, and to report anyone who spoke of divine sparks, inner sight, or forbidden knowledge. Villagers, loyal to the Church but unaware of the true threat, were questioned and pressured to give names. The web of pursuit grew wider, faster, and tighter with each passing day. Lucian knew that staying in the monastery was no longer safe. If he remained, the codex would be taken, and the knowledge it contained might vanish forever. He began planning a flight, charting secret routes through forests and hills, memorizing places where he could hide the manuscript temporarily, and learning how to trust only those who had no reason to betray him. Each step he took was measured, each movement calculated. He knew that the Inquisition would strike quickly and without mercy once they learned of his path. The knowledge of Thoth, the ancient wisdom that could awaken the mind, was now the most dangerous treasure in Europe. And the hunt for the monk had begun. Every shadow could conceal a spy, every sound could signal betrayal, and every night could bring the moment when the Codex would be lost forever. Lucian's journey was no longer just a test of faith. It was a fight for survival, a battle between the church that sought control and a young monk who carried the seed of awakening in his hands. Lucian knew he could not stay. The shadows of the Inquisition had grown too long. Their whispers had reached the monastery walls, and the codex he carried beneath his robes was far too dangerous to leave behind. One moonless night he slipped quietly from his cell, treading lightly over the cold stone floors, his heart pounding with every step. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth as he slipped past the gates and into the dark countryside, carrying with him a fragment of the Book of Thoth, a surviving chapter that could awaken memory across lifetimes. He travelled under the cover of darkness, moving from village to village, avoiding the main roads where travellers and soldiers would notice him. Each night he studied the codex by candlelight, memorizing passages and tracing the intricate symbols with his fingers. Every word, every line seemed to pulse with energy as if Thoth himself had inscribed them to survive centuries of persecution. The codex spoke of light within the human mind, of divine sparks waiting to be remembered, of knowledge that could change the world if it fell into the right hands. The journey was exhausting. Lucian navigated dense forests and crossed icy rivers, always listening for the sound of riders who might be trailing him. The Inquisition had eyes everywhere, and he could not trust anyone he met. Occasionally he found sympathetic villagers who offered food and shelter but asked no questions, sensing the fear in his eyes. He moved cautiously, avoiding towns for long stretches, preferring the solitude of the wilderness where the stars guided him more than any map could. As the days passed, the Alps rose ahead, like a jagged wall of stone and snow. Lucian's journey became even more perilous. Narrow mountain paths threatened to betray him with every misstep. The wind howled through the valleys, and snowflakes stung his face, but he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the codex must survive. Somewhere within these mountains, far from the reach of the church, he could hide the book and preserve its secrets for the future. At night he found caves and abandoned shepherd huts where he could rest, always keeping the codex close. Each time he unrolled its fragile pages, he felt a sense of awe and fear. The knowledge contained within was powerful, and he realized that to share it carelessly would be as dangerous as letting it fall into the hands of the Inquisition. He had become both guardian and fugitive, carrying a treasure more valuable than gold and more dangerous than any weapon. The higher he climbed into the Alps, the quieter the world became. Rivers rushed beneath ice, and the mountains seemed to whisper secrets older than Rome itself. Lucian began marking hidden spots along his route, where he could temporarily conceal pages of the codex. He knew that every step brought him closer to safety, but also closer to exhaustion and exposure. The mountains tested him, but he had no choice. By the time he reached a secluded valley nestled between jagged peaks, Lucian paused to catch his breath. The codex lay in his hands like a fragile heart of light. He understood that the path ahead would be long, that the church would continue to search relentlessly, and that the survival of the Book of Thoth depended entirely on his courage, cunning, and unwavering determination. The Alps had become both sanctuary and trial, a place where a single monk could stand between history and oblivion. As Lucian rested in the cold stillness of the Alpine valley, he was not alone for long. Shadows moved silently through the pines, and from them emerged figures cloaked in dark robes, faces hidden beneath deep hoods. At first he thought he was dreaming, or that the Inquisition had finally found him, but their approach was deliberate, careful, and carried no threat. One of the figures stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was both commanding and gentle. They had been watching, waiting, and they knew about the Codex. The leader explained that they were part of a secret brotherhood, a hidden order descended from the ancient Hermeticists of Egypt and Greece. Their mission had survived for centuries. When the Great Purge destroyed so many libraries and burned so many manuscripts, the Brotherhood had taken it upon themselves to collect and protect what remained. They moved in silence, communicating only through symbols and secret codes, ensuring that fragments of the Book of Thoth survived across Europe. Lucian listened in disbelief. He had thought he was alone in carrying the last hope of Hermetic knowledge. But these strangers revealed that many fragments existed hidden in monasteries, buried beneath the floors of abandoned temples, even sewn into the bindings of books in libraries no one had touched in decades. The Brotherhood did not claim to have the entire book, but they had pieces powerful enough to awaken understanding, powerful enough to teach what the Church had tried to erase. The leader explained that the fragments were scattered deliberately. No single place held the whole book. Each fragment contained a lesson, a piece of Thoth's vision that could guide those who were ready to awaken. They had been waiting for someone like Lucian, someone capable of understanding the Codex without destroying it, someone who could carry its wisdom forward carefully. Lucian realized that his journey had only just begun. The Codex he held was a key, not the whole door. The Brotherhood promised to guide him, to teach him how to read the fragments safely, and to show him where other pieces had been hidden. Each fragment held secrets of the mind, the stars, and the soul that could change history if misused or misunderstood. It was both a privilege and a burden. Over the following days, the Brotherhood shared their knowledge. They explained how Hermetic traditions had been preserved through secret symbols carved into cathedrals, geometric designs hidden in mosaics, and coded manuscripts disguised as ordinary texts. They taught Lucian that the Codex was alive, not as an object, but as a living thread of wisdom flowing through time, linking those who sought knowledge with those who had passed it down. The Brotherhood moved silently, never drawing attention, always watching for spies and informants. They had survived because they understood patience, discretion, and the delicate balance between hiding knowledge and sharing it with those ready. Lucian felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. The Codex, the fragments, and the knowledge of Thoth were no longer his alone. For the first time in his life, he understood that the search for truth was never a solitary journey. It was a chain stretching across centuries. The Brotherhood whispered that if the fragments could be reunited even partially, they could awaken a generation, and perhaps the world, to remember its divine inheritance. Lucian knew that he had stepped into a story far larger than himself, one in which the fate of knowledge, the Church, and humanity itself were intertwined. The Codex revealed secrets that reached beyond ordinary understanding. As Lucian worked with the Brotherhood to translate passages, he discovered a concept that both fascinated and terrified him. The text spoke of a language older than Egypt, older than Greece, a cosmic tongue composed of symbols that shaped on not only thought, but matter itself. Each symbol carried vibration, intention, and energy. To understand it was not merely to read, but to perceive the universe itself as alive and responsive. Lucian spent long nights tracing the lines of these symbols with his finger, feeling a strange resonance hum through the air. The Codex explained that humans once understood this language instinctively, but had lost it over time. The beings of light described in earlier passages had spoken it naturally, shaping reality with thought and symbol. Humans, the Codex claimed, could remember these connections if taught carefully and reverently. The Brotherhood guided Lucian, teaching him to focus on the patterns within the symbols. A circle was not just a shape, but a representation of wholeness, continuity, and unity. A triangle expressed balance and intention. Lines intersecting with purpose could create energy, focus, and movement. They explained that when one combined symbols according to specific sequences, the mind could influence perception, awareness, and even physical reality in ways the untrained could not comprehend. At first, Lucian felt overwhelmed. The rules of this language were precise and demanding. A slight error could result in confusion or misperception. But slowly, he began to understand. Each symbol awakened memories of other lives, of lessons hidden deep within the soul. He began to feel connected to a larger consciousness that transcended his own body and time. Reading a symbol became more than sight. It became experience. The Codex warned that the language was powerful and dangerous in the wrong hands. To use it selfishly or without understanding could disrupt natural balance. The Church, the text implied, feared this knowledge because it revealed that divinity was not granted from above, but available within each person who learned to see and understand. Symbols were keys. Knowledge of their order was freedom. The Church had sought to suppress it because freedom threatened control. Lucian realized that the universe was alive with subtle codes. Stars, plants, even water currents carried patterns that could be interpreted. The language of the gods was not spoken aloud, but lived in everything. When understood, it allowed humans to align with natural law, to awaken insight, and to influence the flow of events in subtle but meaningful ways. He practiced for hours, drawing symbols in sand, tracing them on parchment, feeling the resonance in his hands and chest. His understanding grew. He began to see patterns in the world that others overlooked. Light reflecting on stone, wind moving through leaves, the rhythm of rivers, they all spoke in this ancient tongue. The more he listened, the more the universe seemed to respond. By the end of the third week, Lucian knew that the Codex had given him more than knowledge. It had given him a language, a way to communicate with the hidden forces of reality itself. He understood why the Church had feared the Book of Thoth. It was not just wisdom, it was power. And with it, humanity could remember the light it had once carried, and perhaps reshape the world itself. Lucian held the next chapter of the Codex with a mix of awe and trepidation. Its title was simple yet profound: The Mirror of the Soul. The passage described a ritual unlike any he had ever encountered, a method to open the inner eye and peer into the memories of past lives. The text warned that this ritual was not a game. It required patience, discipline, and a mind unclouded by fear or desire. Those who attempted it unprepared risked losing themselves in the vastness of their own consciousness. The Brotherhood guided him through the first steps. They instructed him to find a quiet place, free from distraction, where he could sit with his mind still and his body relaxed. Lucian chose a small cave hidden in the Alps, far from the paths of travellers and soldiers. The wind whispered through the entrance like a living thing, carrying the scent of pine and snow, and he felt the weight of centuries of hidden knowledge pressing gently on his shoulders. He began with breathing exercises, inhaling deeply and exhaling slowly, focusing entirely on the rhythm of his body. The Codex described this as the opening of the gateway, a way to align the physical self with the soul. Hours passed in silence, and Lucian felt as though he were slipping from the world of stone and air into something unseen and infinite. Every sound around him became amplified. Every shadow seemed alive with meaning. When he was ready, the Codex instructed him to visualize a mirror suspended in the mind. This mirror was not made of silver or glass, but of consciousness itself. Lucian imagined its surface smooth and reflective, a place where the light of past experiences could appear. At first, the mirror was empty, a blank expanse that seemed infinite. Then, small flickers emerged, faces he did not recognize but felt intimately familiar. Places he had never visited yet knew as home. Emotions that belonged to others, yet coursed through him as though they were his own. The visions intensified. Lucian saw himself in distant lands, in temples long destroyed, in cities buried beneath centuries of dust. He witnessed lives of learning, of struggle, of awakening and failure. Every memory was vivid, every sensation precise. He understood that these were not fantasies. They were fragments of the soul, preserved across lifetimes, waiting for the mind to remember. Hours became days, yet time seemed suspended. Lucian began to see patterns in his experiences, lessons repeated across centuries, choices that echoed forward, consequences that shaped realities beyond his current life. The Codex explained that the inner eye did not merely show the past. It revealed connections, the web of cause and effect, the continuity of consciousness that the Church had tried to suppress by controlling knowledge. When he finally opened his eyes to the world of stone and wind again, Lucian felt transformed. The mirror of the soul had revealed the hidden currents of existence. He understood that humans were far more than their current forms. They were living archives of experience and light. He carried a secret so profound that it could awaken others if shared wisely and carefully. Lucian knew that the Church would never allow such knowledge to flourish. Yet, he also realized that the soul, once awakened, could not be chained. The mirror of the soul had opened, and a single spark of memory had begun to illuminate the long-forgotten paths of human potential. Deep within the heart of the Vatican, beneath layers of stone and centuries of secrecy, there existed a chamber that few even knew to exist. The air was thick with incense and the scent of old parchment. Here, behind iron doors and guarded corridors, a select group of clergy gathered in secret. They were not ordinary priests reciting prayers for the faithful. They were custodians of knowledge far older and far more dangerous than any public scripture. Among them were fragments of the book of Thoth, manuscripts so powerful that even the mention of their contents could ignite fear and awe. The chamber was dimly lit by flickering torches that cast long shadows across the walls lined with shelves. Scrolls and codices rested in glass cases, bound in leather etched with strange symbols. Some were small, fragile pieces of papyrus barely legible. Others were thick volumes containing diagrams, maps, and cryptic instructions. The clergy who entered did so with reverence and caution. They understood that the fragments they held were both a source of immense power and a dangerous responsibility. Meetings were held in strict secrecy. Discussions took place in whispers, voices measured and careful, as though the walls themselves might carry their words to the wrong ears. They spoke of the hermetic fragments, of passages that described the divine spark within humanity, of symbols that could manipulate thought and matter, of the inner eye that could awaken past lives. These were the same teachings that the Church publicly condemned. Yet, in this hidden chamber, they were studied, copied, and interpreted. The priests debated how much of the knowledge could be shared. Some argued that humanity was not yet ready, that revealing these fragments could lead to chaos, heresy, and the collapse of the Church's authority. Others believed that selective dissemination could strengthen the Church by giving certain leaders insight and power beyond ordinary comprehension. Every word spoken in the chamber was weighed against centuries of doctrine, political strategy, and fear. Despite the secrecy, the presence of the fragments shaped the Church's decisions. Calendars were adjusted, texts were rewritten, and history itself was subtly guided to obscure truths that could awaken too much curiosity. The clergy who knew of the fragments understood that knowledge was a weapon, far more potent than armies or wealth, capable of shaping the minds of kings and scholars alike. Outside the chamber, the Vatican appeared serene and holy, a center of faith and worship. Inside, however, the air buzzed with the weight of forbidden understanding. The fragments were studied not only for spiritual insight, but for the control they could offer. Maps were compared, diagrams traced, and rituals recorded in secret codices meant only for those initiated. The Church had become both guardian and gatekeeper, holding in its hands the knowledge that humanity had once possessed freely. The dark chamber remained a place of silent power. It was a reminder that the greatest authority in the world did not only rely on belief and devotion, but also on the careful curation of what humanity could and could not know. And in the shadows, the fragments of Thoth's book waited, preserved by those who understood their value, yet hidden from the world that might one day need to awaken to the truth. In a small workshop, tucked away in a remote corner of Florence, an alchemist named Matteo labored over ancient scrolls and fragments of texts collected over decades. His workbench was cluttered with vials of strange liquids, powders of unknown origin, and scraps of parchment covered in symbols and diagrams. Matteo had spent years studying the remnants of Hermetic knowledge, following a trail that led from Egypt to Greece and across the monasteries of Europe. He believed he had discovered a formula, a method for combining all surviving fragments of the Book of Thoth into a single coherent text. The formula was not simple. It required precise alignment of symbols and a deep understanding of the language of the gods. Each fragment carried its own energy, its own frequency, and if combined incorrectly, the knowledge could be distorted or even lost forever. Matteo knew that one wrong step could destroy centuries of preservation. He approached the task with a mixture of reverence and fear. The very act of uniting these fragments felt like summoning forces older than history itself. He worked at night, the workshop lit only by flickering candles that cast long shadows across the walls. Dust floated in the air, and the smell of herbs and chemicals mingled with the cold stone. Matteo laid out the fragments on a large oak table, arranging them according to the sequence suggested in the Hermetic diagrams. Some fragments contained instructions for meditation and the awakening of the inner eye. Others revealed symbols that could shape thought and matter, and still others, described the beings of light that existed before humanity. As he began the process, Matteo followed the codified steps with painstaking precision. He traced symbols with powdered metals, whispered incantations in the ancient tongue, and meditated to align his own consciousness with the energies contained in the texts. Hours passed, and he could feel the fragments responding to each other as if alive, vibrating with knowledge and hidden power. The air in the workshop seemed charged, and he felt a strange connection to the past, to the monks and hermeticists who had preserved these pages through centuries of danger. The danger was real. If the fragments were mishandled, the energy could overwhelm the mind, causing madness or unconsciousness. Matteo had prepared himself with rituals of protection, drawing circles and sigils to channel the knowledge safely. He understood that the Church, if aware of his work, would consider him a heretic beyond redemption. Yet the pursuit of truth outweighed fear. The fragments were meant to be united, not hidden forever, and he believed that only through this process could humanity recover the wisdom it had lost. As dawn approached, he felt the energy peak. The fragments vibrated in unison, forming a coherent text that began to reveal the architecture of reality itself. Knowledge that had been scattered for centuries was now aligned. The Book of Thoth was no longer just fragments. It was a living manuscript, a map of consciousness, a guide to awakening the human mind. Matteo knew that the next step would require courage, for the reunited book would attract attention, power, and danger. Yet he also knew that humanity's hidden inheritance was finally within reach, waiting for those who dared to awaken to its light. The Brotherhood had grown confident in their secrecy over centuries. Hidden in remote valleys and abandoned monasteries across Europe, they believed their work would remain untouched. They had learned patience, discretion, and the art of silence. But even the most careful network is vulnerable to betrayal. One night in the year 1237, a shadow moved within their ranks. A member, tempted by fear, ambition, or promises from the Church, revealed the location of one of their central gatherings. Lucian was among the scholars present that evening. They were discussing the alchemist's progress and the possibility of uniting the surviving fragments of the Book of Thoth. Candles flickered on the walls, casting long, shifting shadows over scrolls and codices. No one suspected that the betrayal had already been set in motion. The traitor had sent word to Church officials, describing entrances, hidden passages, and the identities of those present. Within hours, soldiers and inquisitors would arrive. The first sign came when the dogs barked in the valley below. Then the distant clatter of hooves on stone paths echoed through the mountains. Panic rippled through the gathering. The scholars knew that capture would mean not only death for them, but the destruction of the codices and fragments they had dedicated their lives to protect. They grabbed what they could, wrapping scrolls in cloth, sliding pages into hidden pouches, and preparing to scatter into the surrounding forests. The raid began swiftly. Soldiers surged through the hidden doors, torches held high, eyes scanning every corner. Shouts echoed against the stone walls, and the sound of breaking wood filled the air. The Brotherhood fought to buy time, using their knowledge of secret passages and hidden tunnels to lead some members to safety. Lucian clutched the codex, his mind racing. Every step was measured, every breath heavy with fear and determination. He could hear the inquisitors behind him, relentless and unyielding. Outside the walls, the forest offered some cover, but the valley was no longer safe. Trails were set, horses ridden by church messengers, and the betrayal meant there was no trusted path. Scholars split into smaller groups, each carrying fragments, each running toward different corners of Europe. Lucian followed a narrow trail into the mountains, guided only by memory, fear, and instinct. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a threat. The betrayal had shattered their carefully constructed sanctuary, and now survival depended on cunning, speed, and luck. Despite the chaos, Lucian felt a strange clarity. The scattering of the scholars meant the fragments would be preserved in multiple locations, harder for the church to destroy completely. What had begun as catastrophe could become an opportunity. The codices were more precious than ever. The knowledge of Thoth would survive if the bearers remained vigilant. By the time the sun rose, the valley was silent except for the faint crackle of abandoned fires and the rustle of leaves. The Brotherhood had been scattered, betrayed from within, yet the fragments remained in the hands of those determined to protect them. Lucian, breathless and wary, knew that the struggle for the Book of Thoth was far from over. Betrayal had changed everything, but it had not extinguished the light. In the heart of Paris, beneath the winding streets and centuries of stone, excavators uncovered a hidden chamber long forgotten by history. The year was 1342, yet the vault they found seemed untouched by time. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp earth. The walls were lined with carved symbols, ancient and worn, their meaning lost to the ages. At the center of the chamber rested a single manuscript, bound in deep brown leather, cracked with age, yet emanating a presence that felt alive. Scholars and clerics alike gathered in awe around the discovery. The manuscript was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its pages were filled with diagrams, symbols, and passages in a language that seemed to shimmer in the flickering torchlight. The codex was said to contain fragments of the Book of Thoth, preserved in secrecy for centuries. Whoever held it would not merely read history. They would feel it, touch the hidden architecture of knowledge itself, and perhaps awaken the mind in ways thought impossible. The chamber had been sealed for reasons no one could fully comprehend. The air was still and heavy, as if the very walls had absorbed the weight of those who had locked the manuscript away. The inscriptions on the door hinted at protection rituals, warnings that only the worthy or the initiated could handle the contents safely. Those who had excavated the vault approached cautiously, aware that the discovery was more than an archaeological find. It was a key, a spark of lost knowledge, and perhaps a threat to powers that had kept it hidden for centuries. Lucian had arrived in Paris following whispers of the chamber. He moved quietly through the crowds of scholars and labourers, careful not to reveal his identity. The moment he glimpsed the manuscript, he felt a pull unlike any he had experienced before. The leather binding seemed to hum beneath his fingers, a resonance that connected directly to the fragments he carried and the teachings he had begun to understand. The hidden chamber had been waiting for someone ready to receive its secret. As the scholars worked to unseal the manuscript, Lucian studied the surrounding walls. Every carving, every symbol, every faded line of text seemed to echo the hermetic principles he had learned in the Alps. The chamber itself was a teaching, a puzzle left by those who understood the power of the Book of Thoth and feared it might fall into unworthy hands. The air vibrated with a strange energy that made him aware of the weight of centuries pressing down through stone and mortar. The manuscript was finally opened. Its pages were delicate, yet the ink remained vivid, telling stories of light, consciousness, and knowledge, predating even the earliest foundations of Europe. Lucian realized that this was more than a fragment. It was a map, a guide, a living testament to the persistence of wisdom. For the first time in decades, the scattered truths of the Book of Thoth were converging. Lucian understood that the hidden chamber beneath Paris was not merely a vault. It was a crossroads where history, secrecy, and awakening met. The manuscript was alive with knowledge and potential, a challenge and a promise. Whoever could read it with clarity would hold the power to awaken memory, reshape understanding, and perhaps begin to piece together the centuries of lost wisdom that had been hidden from humanity. In the year 2020, a modern historian named Eleanor Moreau stumbled across a manuscript in the archives of the Sorbonne. It was leather-bound, fragile, and unlike anything in the catalogue. Scholars had whispered about hidden texts surviving from the Hermetic tradition, but few had seen anything so complete. When Eleanor opened the pages, she felt a familiar resonance deep within her mind, a connection to something ancient, powerful, and almost alive. The symbols and diagrams matched descriptions she had read in old accounts of the Book of Thoth, and her heart raced with the possibility that she held in her hands a piece of history that had been deliberately hidden for centuries. Eleanor spent hours in the dim library light, comparing the manuscript to surviving fragments of codices that had been preserved in private collections across Europe. Every symbol, every line, every arcane diagram seemed to align perfectly. It was as if the manuscript had been waiting for someone capable of understanding its meaning. She traced the patterns with her fingers and murmured the phrases quietly, feeling a strange vibration in the air, a whisper of something beyond ordinary comprehension. The text described concepts that challenged everything she had learned in modern historical studies. It spoke of light within the human mind, the awakening of past memories, and the inner eye that could see across lifetimes. It described the language of the gods, symbols that shaped thought and matter, and the beings of light that had existed before humanity. Eleanor realized that this was not merely a historical artifact. It was a living map, a guide to knowledge that had survived wars, purges, and centuries of suppression. She cross-referenced the manuscript with old Hermetic texts, some translated and others still in their original ancient Greek or Coptic. Every page reinforced the connection. The formulas for meditation, the diagrams of cosmic structures, and the rituals for awakening the inner eye matched exactly what Lucian and the Secret Brotherhood had preserved centuries before. It was as if the Codex had bridged time, speaking directly to her as a historian capable of decoding its secrets. Elena understood the stakes. The Church had long controlled access to such texts. The fragments hidden in vaults and archives were not forgotten. They had been guarded, protected, and sometimes suppressed. This manuscript was evidence that knowledge survived outside sanctioned channels. If it were revealed publicly, it could change the way humanity viewed history, divinity, and the human mind. She knew she had to proceed carefully, documenting the findings while protecting the manuscript from those who might seek to reclaim it for control rather than understanding. Over the following weeks, Eleanor worked tirelessly, reconstructing the Codex in digital form, comparing it to other fragments and decoding passages that had remained obscure for centuries. She realized that the work of Hermetic scholars, alchemists, and monks had not been in vain. Their careful preservation had allowed a modern mind to reconnect with ancient knowledge. The Book of Thoth was no longer lost. Elena felt a profound sense of responsibility. She was not merely a historian, she was a guardian of awakening. The manuscript confirmed that humanity had inherited wisdom deliberately hidden for centuries, and it was now her task to ensure it could be studied, understood, and respected. The past had reawakened in her hands, and the secret once buried beneath layers of time was alive again. Eleanor stared at the pages of the manuscript as if seeing the world for the first time. The text unfolded a revelation that shook her to the core. It claimed that humanity itself was divine, that every person carried within them a spark of light capable of shaping reality through awareness and understanding. The Codex described consciousness not as a passive state, but as an active force, a living power that could interact with the world and alter it if properly harnessed. The manuscript explained that divinity was not granted from above, nor dependent on priests or prophets. It resided within each human being, waiting to be remembered and awakened. Symbols, meditation, and careful alignment of thought and intention could open the inner eye, reveal past experiences, and unlock the potential to influence matter and energy. Elena felt a thrill and a chill as she read these passages, realizing that the teachings had been hidden for centuries because they threatened authority, not because they were false. She traced the diagrams with her fingers, feeling a strange resonance as if the pages themselves were alive. The Codex described exercises in awareness that allowed the practitioner to perceive the threads of cause and effect that ran through time. By focusing attention, aligning intent, and understanding the hidden structures of reality, humans could awaken knowledge that had been lost for millennia. It was a power both subtle and immense, a gift of comprehension that had once been natural, but had been deliberately obscured. The text spoke of the inner God not as a separate entity, but as the awakened consciousness within. It claimed that the divine spark was the source of creativity, understanding, and memory. Humans weren't flawed creatures needing salvation, but living vessels of eternal wisdom. Through awareness and study, the Codex suggested, people could access knowledge beyond the conventional senses, perceiving truths hidden to the ordinary mind and influencing the world in alignment with universal laws. Eleanor reflected on what this meant for history. For centuries, those in power had suppressed such knowledge. The church, kingdoms, and ruling classes had maintained control by teaching that divinity came only from above. The manuscript revealed that this was a deliberate concealment. Knowledge of the inner God allowed autonomy, insight, and freedom of thought. Those who discovered it could awaken themselves and others, but misuse could lead to confusion, fear, or conflict. She realized that understanding this secret was a responsibility. Humanity's potential had been dimmed, but not extinguished. The Codex offered a path to remembering a natural state of awareness that had existed before wars, purges, and centuries of suppression. Elena felt both awe and duty. The revelation of the inner God was more than philosophical. It was practical, a guide to awakening consciousness and reclaiming the light within. Holding the manuscript, Elena understood that the true power of Thoth's teachings was the recognition that the world was not fixed. Reality was interactive, shaped by thought, intention, and knowledge. Humanity had inherited the tools to awaken and influence existence itself. The secret was now in her hands, a truth lost to time, yet waiting to be remembered, waiting to light the path for those who dared to see within themselves and awaken the divine spark that had always been there. News of Elena's discovery spread quietly at first through academic circles, whispered conversations among historians and scholars who understood the significance of the manuscript. Within weeks, however, the story reached the attention of the Vatican. Church authorities were aware that the codex contained fragments of the Book of Thoth and teachings that challenged the traditional understanding of divinity, human nature, and history. Their response was swift and deliberate, though measured to avoid public panic. High-ranking officials convened in secret, discussing the manuscript and the potential consequences of its revelation. They recognized the knowledge as powerful, capable of inspiring a new understanding of humanity's role in the universe. Yet they also saw it as a threat to authority, an idea that could undermine centuries of doctrinal control. The Codex suggested that all divinity resided within every person, not solely in the hands of the Church. Such a concept could disrupt established hierarchy, influence education, and alter the way people viewed themselves and their place in the world. Publicly, the Church issued statements intended to downplay the discovery. They called the manuscript a forgery, a misinterpreted collection of ancient texts, and questioned the credibility of those who reported on it. Academics, journalists, and casual readers were encouraged to treat the story with skepticism. The Church's press offices emphasized tradition, the authority of established scripture, and the importance of verified knowledge, framing any claims about hidden hermetic wisdom as fanciful speculation. Behind the scenes, however, the response was very different. Church operatives discreetly moved to locate the manuscript and secure it. Agents reached out to intermediaries in Paris, Italy, and even private collectors who might have seen fragments of the Codex. The Vatican had experience in discreetly acquiring ancient texts, preserving them within the secret archives, and controlling access to prevent knowledge from spreading too widely. Every effort was made to recover the manuscript without attracting attention or creating scandal. Eleanor became aware that her work was being monitored. Subtle inquiries from academics and unexpected visitors to the Sorbonne hinted at interest from powerful organizations. She realized that the Church's public dismissal was a mask, a carefully crafted strategy to protect its authority while quietly moving to reclaim what it considered dangerous knowledge. She understood that the Codex was no longer just a scholarly discovery. It had become a focal point in a centuries-long struggle over who controls the flow of human understanding. Despite the pressure, Elena continued her work, documenting the manuscript, comparing it with known fragments, and translating its complex passages. She recognized that transparency was her defense, and that sharing the knowledge with responsible scholars could prevent it from disappearing into secrecy once more. The Vatican's attempts to discredit her only strengthened her resolve. The Church's dual approach of public dismissal and private pursuit demonstrated a timeless tactic. Knowledge that challenged authority could never be allowed to spread unchecked. The manuscript's existence reminded the world that power often lies not only in armies or wealth, but in controlling history, memory, and understanding. Eleanor knew that the struggle to protect and reveal the Codex was far from over, and that the story of Thoth's hidden knowledge had entered a modern chapter where secrecy, vigilance, and courage would determine whether humanity could awaken to its lost wisdom. In the year 2025, the manuscript that had been hidden for centuries surfaced in a way no one had anticipated. A digital copy appeared online, shared through encrypted channels, and quietly circulated among scholars, students, and seekers of truth. Elena Moreau, the historian who had first deciphered the text, watched as the codex spread faster than anyone could have imagined. The Book of Thoth, the fragments of ancient Hermetic knowledge, the rituals and symbols the Church had long sought to suppress, were now accessible to anyone willing to study and understand them. The leak sent shockwaves through both academic and religious communities. Scholars were astonished at the clarity and depth of the manuscript. Symbols that had been studied in isolation for centuries now formed a coherent framework. Passages describing the language of the gods, the inner eye, and the awakening of divine consciousness were no longer confined to hidden archives. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, humanity could glimpse the full scope of knowledge deliberately obscured by fear, authority, and tradition. The Vatican responded quietly at first, sending advisors to assess the impact and attempting to control the narrative. Publicly, statements were issued questioning the legitimacy of the digital copy, claiming it had been altered or misinterpreted. Privately, operatives sought to trace the source, hoping to reclaim or delete the file. Yet, in the age of the internet, no single authority could control the flow of information. Copies multiplied, spread across continents, and reached eyes that were ready to learn. People around the world reacted in varied ways. Some dismissed the text as fantasy, unable to grasp the magnitude of its revelations. Others approached it with reverence, slowly learning to read the symbols, practice the exercises, and awaken the knowledge within themselves. The manuscript instructed patience, meditation, and careful understanding, warning that misuse or superficial study could lead to confusion. Yet, the potential for transformation was real. Humanity was beginning to remember the inner God that had always been present, but long forgotten. Eleanor realized the moment was historic. The work of Hermetic scholars, monks, and secret societies who had preserved fragments across millennia was finally complete. Their labor had bridged time, connecting ancient wisdom with modern curiosity. The Book of Thoth was alive once again, no longer locked in vaults or hidden chambers, but present in the hands and minds of those willing to seek the truth. Knowledge that had once been feared, suppressed, and silenced was now a living force in the world. As the digital manuscript spread, discussions flourished. Online forums, academic papers, and private study groups formed. People compared interpretations, tested exercises, and explored the nature of consciousness, as described in the text. The influence of the Church, which had once maintained control through secrecy, began to wane in the face of widespread access to information. Awareness was awakening, not through authority, but through curiosity, study, and shared understanding. The Book of Thoth had proven that truth cannot be silenced. Centuries of fear, purges, and secrecy could not stop knowledge from resurfacing when humanity was ready. In a world connected by information, light could not be contained. The manuscript now lives in countless hands, inspiring questions, awakening consciousness, and revealing that the power to shape reality and remember the hidden wisdom of the past had always belonged to the people themselves. The church could no longer hold the gate. The book had spoken, and the world was listening.